What happens when loyalty, power, and money collide behind the scenes of a hip-hop business network? This is the case of Dixon versus Cartagena and others, a federal lawsuit filed by Terrance T.A. Dixon, a close collaborator and former hype man who claims he spent over 15 years helping build Fat Joe's business empire, only to be pushed out, underpaid, and silenced. The suit alleges a pattern of manipulation, deception, and threats directly tied to Fat Joe's success. Fat Joe's legal team, led by high-profile attorney Joe Tacopina, has denied all allegations. Tacopina, whose name I love to say and who has represented A$AP Rocky and Meek Mill, described the lawsuit as a blatant act of retaliation, noting it was filed after Fat Joe sued Dixon for defamation. But Dixon has receipts, specifically recorded phone calls that support his claims, captured by Percy Forrest, a Bronx hip-hop manager and longtime friend of Fat Joe. His recordings are transcribed in the complaint and they play a critical role if they are authentic. It bears mentioning Percy Forrest was killed in late 2024, stabbed outside a Queens nightclub. No suspect or motive has been publicly identified. His absence now adds a haunting weight to the story. In part 1, The Machine That Built Fat Joe, I'll partially walk through the complaint as it's laid out. This will not be read verbatim. The entire lawsuit is 157 pages, so instead, I will summarize the entire complaint in the order it's laid out, highlighting key portions, and separate it into 2 parts. Before we start, welcome to Mimi Leaks. If you find this kind of content valuable, like the video, subscribe, and hit the bell so you don't miss part 2. If you know someone who should see this, share it. Also, this video discusses allegations involving coercion and exploitation, among other sensitive topics. Viewer discretion is advised. Now, let's get started. This case was filed in federal court, specifically the Southern District of New York, also known as SDNY. Plaintiff Terrance Dixon, or TA, versus defendants Joseph Cartagena, that is Fat Joe, and 3 individual defendants, Pistol Pete Torres, Rich Player Jospitre, and Erica Moriera. The named business entities are Sneaker Addict Touring, Slate, and Rock Nation. Finally, John and Jane Doe's and ABC Corporations. Dixon's claim is defendants violated laws in New York and Florida related to trafficking and racketeering and laws against unjust enrichment, quantum merit, fraudulent concealment and fraud, intentional infliction of emotional distress, and money laundering. The lawsuit stems from a deliberate and sustained campaign in which a celebrity exploited a creative partner through a network of enforcers, associates, and shell companies. Through the use of force, fraud, manipulation, and intimidation, plaintiffs' contributions, foundational to Fat Joe's success and brand, were suppressed, all while defendants were enriched as intended. And then we have the preliminary statement. For more than 16 years, Terrance Dixon, aka TA, worked alongside Fat Joe in multiple roles: lyricist, performer, security aide, and creative partner. Despite shaping the defendant's brand and contributions to major songs, Dixon was denied credit, royalties, and compensation. The complaint says Dixon was psychologically and financially controlled through manipulated travel, withheld support, and threats, tactics used to coerce compliance on and off tour. Enforcers like Pistol Pete and Rich Player allegedly maintained this control through coercion, intimidation, and violence, while Erica Moriera created shell companies and paperwork to hide Dixon's earnings and launder proceeds. Entities like Slate and Sneaker Addict Touring allegedly served as financial fronts. Slate managed hidden royalties, while Sneaker Addict fraudulently obtained federal loans. Rock Nation is accused of helping suppress Dixon's rights, retaliating with a countersuit, and benefiting from a 10% cut of Cartagena's earnings. As an aside, the complaint says Desiree Perez, Rock Nation's CEO, was defrauded when Cartagena diverted side payments behind her back. Together, these parties allegedly enriched themselves off Dixon's work without paying him or crediting his contributions to Fat Joe's brand or catalog. Dixon was allegedly issued inflated W-2s to mask wage theft and expose him to tax risk. An accountant claims records were falsified and large sums of cash, $600,000 and $200,000, were pulled from business accounts without documentation. At UPNYC, Fat Joe's sneaker store, low-wage staff flaunted luxury goods while the business operated largely in undocumented cash, allegedly evidence of laundering. Despite Fat Joe's earning tens of thousands a month in royalties, Dixon saw none of it. At one point, a $30,000 Live Nation check meant for Dixon was allegedly used to pay off Cartagena's IRS debts. These allegations extend to forced acts of intimacy, I guess you could say, coerced, surveyed, and sometimes filmed, described as part of a pattern of dominance and control. These acts allegedly occurred across tours in Miami, Germany, North Carolina, and more, with minors and dancers present. Staff and security stood by. The complaint frames this as a systemic abuse backed by corporate silence. And we're at paragraph 28. Threats via burner accounts, including, quote, "You love your family, right?" were sent to intimidate Dixon, allegedly violating federal statutes on witness tampering and threats. A retaliatory lawsuit was filed by Roc Nation and Cartagena, not to win, but to harass Dixon, drain legal resources, and deter others from speaking out. It's cited as conspiracy to obstruct justice. The complaint also claims defendants submitted backdated contracts and false split sheets to BMI and ASCAP, erasing Dixon's authorship and assigning 100% credit to Fat Joe. Paragraph 37. The result is $600,000 in lost royalties and permanent exclusion from digital and licensing income. These documents allegedly violate wire fraud and record falsification laws. And again, cash withdrawals of $200,000 and $600,000 with no paper trail support broader claims of laundering and tax evasion through nominee entities and foreign sources. The complaint argues that this was not isolated, but a long-running criminal enterprise under RICO, meeting both closed and open-ended continuity through repeated fraud and intimidation, which brings us to jurisdiction and venue. The court has jurisdiction over the case based on federal law claims under Trafficking Victims Protection Act and RICO, as well as related state law claims. Personal jurisdiction is established over all defendants due to their substantial business transactions within the jurisdiction. The venue of SDNY is proper, as a substantial portion of the predicate acts and wrongful conduct occurred there. Defendants also maintained significant business operations within the district. That brings us to parties. The plaintiff is Terrance Dixon, professionally known as TA, and he is a New York resident who worked with Fat Joe from 2005 through 2020. His roles spanned performance, songwriting, vocals, tour logistics, and security. Despite this range, Dixon claims he was never properly credited or compensated for his foundational contributions. Defendants. First, Joseph Antonio Cartagena, widely known as Fat Joe, is a Miami-based rapper and music executive affiliated with labels like Atlantic Records and Terror Squad. According to the complaint, Cartagena exercised full control over Dixon's professional output while excluding him from royalties, credits, and authorship, even on songs Dixon claims to have co-written, like Congratulations, Ice Cream, and Crack House. These works appeared on albums such as Jose 2, The Dark Side Volume 1, and Elephant in the Room. Pistol Pete Torres is described as Cartagena's enforcer and street-level captain. He allegedly issued violent threats and orchestrated physical retaliation to maintain internal control, targeting Dixon and others who disrupted the enterprise. His involvement is supported by audio recordings and coded language allegedly used to plan an ambush. Richard Rich Player Jospitre served as Cartagena's business manager and a top operative. He allegedly maintained threats and retaliation, documented through phone recordings directed at Dixon and others. His role bridged both financial oversight and enforcement. Erica Juliana Morietta is a Florida resident and is accused of unlawfully acting as legal counsel while creating shell corporations to help the enterprise conceal stolen income and launder funds. Her actions allegedly enabled the diversion of royalties and obstructed Dixon's legal recourse. Sneaker Addict Touring is a Florida company tied to Cartagena, allegedly obtained PPP loans under false pretenses. The complaint claims the business misrepresented its operations to secure financial relief, diverting the funds into the enterprise. Slate, another Florida entity, functioned as the financial backbone of the enterprise, using shell companies and entities like Belidat LLC and R4 So Valid LLC. Slate allegedly moved money generated from uncredited music and laundered the proceeds. Rock Nation, a Delaware company with its headquarters in New York, is named as Cartagena's current management firm. It allegedly took over his publishing rights in 2017 and receives 10% of his income. The complaint claims Rock Nation jointly employed Dixon, directed his work, and helped divert his royalties, and retaliated against him via a countersuit. The John and Jane Doe defendants are unnamed individuals, possibly managers, agents, accountants, or staff who allegedly helped carry out or conceal the wrongdoing. Finally, ABC corporations 1 through 10 refer to unidentified business entities that are tied to the scheme. These may have held or funneled income, issued false credits, or helped erase Dixon's authorship. The complaint reserves the right to identify them after further investigation. Tolling of the statute of limitations and discovery rule. Dixon alleges that Fat Joe actively hid critical information like royalties, royalty entitlements, credits, and contract terms throughout their working relationship. He didn't learn the full extent of the fraud until 2024 through a former manager and an insider accountant. Through their 16-year partnership, Dixon was told repeatedly that he'd be taken care of, delaying any reason to investigate further. Under New York law, such concealment justifies tolling under statute of limitations until discovery, a principle recognized by courts when there's a power imbalance, as there is here. Dixon filed this complaint within 2 years of uncovering the fraud, making his claims timely. The same logic applies under federal law, and based on these grounds, the complaint argues all claims are timely and should proceed. In order to make sense of the background, I had to make it 2 parts. So today is part 1, and it focuses on the machine that built Fat Joe. It has 3 chapters. And part 2 will focus on the machine that protected him. Chapter 1, Contributions and Creative Erasure. From 2005 through 2022, Terrance Dixon, professionally known as TA, worked in close partnership with Fat Joe and key members of the Cartagena enterprise, including Pistol Pete, Rich Player, Erica Morietta, and affiliated companies like Rock Nation, Slate, and Sneaker Addict Touring. Over 16 years, he contributed to creative output, stage shows, branding, and logistics that helped build a multi-million-dollar persona. There was no contract, no job title, no formal compensation. The arrangement was structured to extract labor while denying Dixon the financial and reputational benefits of his work. His role extended far beyond that of a hype man. He wrote lyrics, structured hooks, and recorded background vocals used on released tracks. He performed at more than 200 live shows, managed travel logistics, acted as bodyguard, and handled emergencies. He also contributed to branding strategies and studio concepts that shaped entire albums. The enterprise profited from all of it. Dixon's labor, voice, and presence were monetized, but he was excluded from royalties, publishing rights, and back-end profits. Credit was withheld. Contracts were never offered. His name was left off of paperwork. The structure ensured that creative and financial control remained solely with Fat Joe and his affiliates. As mentioned in paragraph 84, plaintiff's unrecognized and unpaid labor thus became the silent foundation of defendant Cartagena's commercial success, leaving plaintiff economically disadvantaged and professionally invisible. Chapter 2: Fraud and Deception. For over a decade, Dixon helped shape the sound of Fat Joe's catalog, contributing lyrics, melodies, and background vocals to dozens of tracks. His voice and ideas are embedded in albums like Jose 2, The Dark Side Volume 1, and Elephant in the Room. But when the credits rolled, his name was nowhere to be found. He was promised 15% ownership of every tract he worked on, 15% of the gross earnings, and formal letters of direction to secure his royalties. Trusting those promises, he kept writing, recording, and performing, believing his work would eventually speak for itself. No letters were issued, no royalties were paid. Dixon was never registered with a single performing rights organization. Despite his voice being on the records, he never saw a single dollar. The money was redirected elsewhere. In 2024, he uncovered the paper trail, falsified and backdated split sheets that erased his authorship. These ghost contracts reassigned full publishing rights to Fat Joe and his companies. Dixon was cut out of the revenue and the record. The filings weren't accidental, they were strategic. Submitted after music dropped, they rewrote history to make it look like Dixon was never there. The royalties followed the paperwork. It wasn't until insiders came forward, including an accountant, that Dixon saw the full scope of what had been done. Roc Nation had taken over management in 2017. They controlled the catalog, oversaw the money, and took a 10% cut of all revenue. Dixon reported directly to Roc Nation and their appointed director. He wasn't just working for Fat Joe, he was working inside a system that knew exactly what it was doing. And according to paragraph 104, as of the filing of this complaint, plaintiff remains wholly excluded from every royalty stream tied to the songs he helped create. His professional identity as a lyricist and co-author has been suppressed in service of defendants' economic domination and the maintenance of a fraudulent authorship narrative. Dixon's underpayment extended beyond the studio. Performance contracts routinely allocated $3,000 per show for his role as a hype man and creative stage presence. Instead, he was handed $250 in cash, off the books, undocumented. In one case, a $30,000 payment from Live Nation was allegedly used to pay off Fat Joe's personal IRS debt. Behind the scenes, Dixon's tax records were manipulated. His accountant was allegedly instructed to inflate W-2s to make it appear he had been paid properly. Meanwhile, Dixon was denied access to contracts, financial records, and even his daily per diem, $100, meant to cover food and lodging. Over 200 shows, missing per diems added up to more than $60,000. Dixon often paid out of pocket, slept in unsafe motels, or waited in airports with no accommodations. Meanwhile, Fat Joe and his entourage flew first class, stayed in luxury hotels, and dined lavishly on money Dixon never saw. Defendants maintained this inequality to reinforce his vulnerability and dependency, and to ensure silence and compliance. Corporate entities facilitated and profited through unlawful diversions of what was rightfully the plaintiff's, with the help of financial structuring and accounting practices overseen by defendant accountant Doe. Defendants concealed everything. As paragraph 120 states, the deliberate and systematic financial exploitation represents a coordinated effort and pattern of fraud, theft, and economic coercion that substantially enriched defendant Cartagena and his associates at plaintiff's direct expense, causing plaintiff to sustain financial harm, economic vulnerability, and emotional distress. Now let's move into Chapter 3, which is control and coercion, according to my chapters. The control wasn't just financial. For 16 years, Dixon lived under a system of psychological pressure, intimidation, and fear. Fat Joe didn't just demand loyalty, he enforced it. Fat Joe reinforced his threats with examples. Dixon was reminded of what happened to others who stepped out of line, like Cuban Link, who was attacked, scarred, and publicly humiliated after a falling out of favor. These were messages, not memories. Any act of resistance, disloyalty, or demand for fair treatment came with the risk of violence, disgrace, or professional ruin. Over time, fear became routine, and the longer he stayed, the harder it became to imagine a way out. The conditions were designed to break him. Verbal abuse, threats, withheld payments, and chaotic travel kept Dixon off balance. He was denied stability. On multiple occasions, he says he was left stranded in foreign cities, without food, shelter, or a way home. The message was simple. He could be discarded at any time, and no one was coming to help. Fat Joe used past violence as leverage, particularly as he kept referencing the attack on Cuban Link to create an immediate sense of threat. The constant fear and pressure took a significant toll on Dixon's well-being. Over 16 years of intimidation, isolation, and emotional manipulation left him with lasting trauma, including panic, anxiety, and PTSD symptoms. The impact of this was not solely emotional, it was a strategic form of control. Every warning and moment of humiliation sent a clear message: stay in line or risk losing everything. As stated in paragraph 131, plaintiff was not only exploited financially, but also subjected to a wide spectrum of coercive control, including forced compliance under observation, surveillance-based humiliation, and repeated psychological pressure, tactics designed to erode his autonomy and ensure silence. Dixon's autonomy was systematically dismantled. He was placed in situations orchestrated to degrade and control. Scenarios arranged by Fat Joe, like those involving acts to be performed with random women brought by Fat Joe to hotel rooms. These often followed performances or studio sessions. The encounters were planned, observed closely, recorded, and directed. Dixon says he didn't participate by choice. He complied out of fear of being cut off financially, left behind in foreign cities, or targeted for retaliation. The threat was always present, and the cost of saying no was never left to the imagination. After one refusal, Dixon says his return flight was canceled. He was left abroad without money, shelter, or support. These scenarios were part of a system designed to reinforce obedience through fear, humiliation, and dependency. Compliance became a condition of Dixon's continued employment, and access to basic needs and human dignity had to be earned. This scenario is textbook of cases of trafficking by coercion. Dixon says these encounters were never about choice. Each one carried the same message: refuse and everything disappears. Over 16 years, he estimates, he was coerced into more than 4,000 such acts. Each one reinforced the unequal power dynamic. Dixon was repeatedly degraded in front of others. Approval at this point felt like survival. The psychological toll was lasting. Dixon says he now lives with symptoms consistent with PTSD and remains in trauma-informed therapy and continues to experience debilitating anxiety. Members of the enterprise witnessed and participated in the coercive dynamics that shaped Dixon's daily life. Roc Nation took over management in 2017, and due to their access, they had every opportunity to intervene. Instead, they benefited, earning commissions, royalties, and influence while Dixon stayed silent. As paragraph 145 says, the retaliatory lawsuit was intended not to prevail on legal merit, but to create public confusion, burden plaintiffs' counsel with discovery costs, and dissuade other victims and whistleblowers from coming forward with evidence of defendants' enterprise activity. And that brings us to paragraph 146, or the start of section F on the complaint, which is right where we'll pick up in part 2. If you've made it this far, thank you for sticking with me. If you found this breakdown helpful, or just fascinating in the way only lawsuits involving hip-hop legends can be, go ahead and like the video, subscribe to the channel, and hit the bell so you don't miss when part 2 drops. Thanks for watching. I'll see you in part 2.